agency anymore. They're the ones who chose that guy for me. I'm going to find another enforcement agency, maybe the one my neighbor uses, which has found a thoroughly honest man over next to him who does a good job of being a judge, and I'll switch to them instead. So in the system where law is a private good being produced on a market, there is a much stronger reason for the individuals whose decisions drive the system to make those as well-informed decisions, because to some degree, what you choose you get. I say to some degree. Remember, it does no good for my agency to be in favor of him as a judge unless they can persuade his agency to agree. So that what we're having is a situation where, as it were, the people bargaining on my side are trying to give me what I want, and it therefore pays me to decide what I want. To some degree, I get to choose, but not without limit. There isn't going to be any agency who has a judge who always rules in my favor, because no other rights enforcement agency would agree to that judge. So there is an element of compromise, but it's an element in which my preferences have heavy weight. On me, not on him. When I switch agencies, he's still with the same agency. The second point is related to that, and that is that even if voters were willing to go to the trouble of trying to figure out who to vote for, it is very hard to get the necessary information. Because, let me take for a moment the present situation in the U.S. During the election, my expressed opinion was that Obama was probably the least bad of the three major candidates, those being 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. My guess now is that I was wrong. My guess is that, in fact, he was worse than one or both of the other candidates. But I'll never know, because I don't get the opportunity of seeing what McCain's administration would have been like. It's entirely possible. After all, Bush was a Republican. Bush was nominally in favor of good things and low government spending. And what did he do? He vastly expanded government spending. Judged by Bush's principles, Bush was a much worse president than Clinton, because Bush actually did the opposite of what he said, and Clinton didn't come too far from doing what Bush said. You know, balanced budget, right? We had a balanced budget for a while. So I don't get to see what kind of a President McCain would have made. So I never get the information, even if I was willing to try to get it, that I really need to make an informed choice. Each administration is facing a new set of problems. It's dealing with them. Something happens. Well, maybe if we hadn't elected Bush, we wouldn't have gone into Iraq. And maybe if we hadn't gone into Iraq, the world would be a better place. Maybe not. I don't know. On the other hand, if I want to buy a car, I get to drive one car, drive another car, talk to my neighbor's car. I get to compare products. Well, let's think about what I get to do when I'm hiring a rights enforcement agency, part of whose product is the network of contracts setting up the law that I'll be under. Well, I can say, I've been under this rights enforcement agency, and it did a lousy job of enforcing my contracts. And furthermore, some SOB sued me for something I hadn't done, and I ended up losing and paying money. But my neighbor, why, he's got a rights enforcement agency that really protects him. When somebody robbed him, in 2 days they had the stuff back. When somebody sued him and he was in the right, the court threw the case out. When somebody sued him and he was in the wrong, he lost. But that's what happens when you're in the wrong. That is to say, if the law is being produced on a private market, you have the opportunity to see what different firms are producing, to some degree at least to compare the quality of their products, how much they charge for it, and thus you have not a perfect mechanism. There are no perfect human mechanisms, but you are at least closer to being able to make the kind of informed judgments we normally make in private markets. And you therefore are much closer to having the kind of institutions for generating good law that we currently use for generating good cars and good food. Now, I noticed a while ago that this meeting is conforming to proper libertarian disorganizational rules and was running about an hour behind. And I have at this point lost track of when I'm supposed to stop speaking. So could someone please tell me, assuming that I want 10 or 15 minutes for questions, how much longer am I supposed to be talking? Another 10 minutes. Very good. Thank you. In that case, let me discuss briefly, because I think it's of interest, especially to an economist, the ways in which this will not give us exactly the right law. And there are at least 3 different issues here. For a longer discussion, if you go to my webpage and search around, you can find the chapter on anarchy and efficient law, which discusses these matters in more detail. And the first problem is that the rights enforcement agencies, like some other firms, are only going to care about marginal customers. All right? Let me consider for a moment the same problem in an industry that already exists. As you can observe, I use an Apple computer, a Macintosh. I have used Macintosh computers for as long as there have been Macintosh computers to use. If Apple raises its prices by $200, I am not going to switch to Windows. If Apple lowers this, if Apple removes some feature I like, I'm not going to, unless it's a really big feature, I'm not going to switch to Windows. That means that Apple can ignore me in designing their computers. That what Apple wants to focus on are those customers who are marginal, are those customers who are just about on the edge between Mac and Windows or Mac and Linux, and who therefore it might either draw in by making a product they like a little better or drive out by making a product they like a little worse. So therefore, when I talk about, going back to my system, when I talk about designing laws people like, if my agency currently has a set of laws that I really love, making them a little better won't get them a penny. They can't charge me more because they don't know that I'm the guy who really loves those laws. And if they raise their whole price, they'll drive out the people who are marginal, which I'm not. All right? So that means that what they're really doing is not quite trying to make the laws that maximize total benefit to everybody. That would be the economically ideal result. They're doing it watching those customers who are close to the edge between hiring their firm and hiring some other firm. So in that respect, it's going to approximate moving to a fully efficient legal system, but it's not going to get there all the way. Same thing is true about Apple. This is not a special feature of the market for law. It is a feature of certain kinds of markets where you have a small number of firms producing products with differing characteristics, and some people value some characteristics more than others. For the economists in the audience, I'm really talking about what's called the theory of monopolistic competition, which is the kind of competition where rather than having a lot of firms like the wheat market producing identical products, you've got a number of firms producing products that compete with each other but not perfectly, like Apple and Windows machines and Linux machines. All right? Second problem. The second problem is that when his agency and my agency are agreeing on a legal rule, they only care about effects on their customers. Let me take a real example, and which is one where I can not only predict that my system will get it wrong, I can tell you in which direction it'll get it wrong. Because one of the things that we are going to disagree about is copyright law. I am an author, and I therefore want a judge who believes in copyright law. Nice, strong copyright law, so that I can get revenue from my writing. He, we will imagine, is a consumer of intellectual property. He reads books, and he, on the whole, is not too happy about having to pay me licensing fees to read my books. Now, if it was just the two of us who were affected, the agency would in effect say, is it worth more to me to have copyright law or more to him not to have copyright law? And they'd try to get the law that way. And if only the two of us were affected, that would be the right answer. And then what we would say is, look, it's true that when he pays me licensing fees, he loses money, but I get that money. Furthermore, if nobody pays me licensing fees, I won't write the book, and then he won't get the benefit of reading the book, so on net, we're better off with copyright law. Maybe, maybe not, because there are costs to enforcing laws. But in fact, if our agencies agree to copyright law, not only does he pay me licensing fees for my books, that makes me write more books, and you get to read those books even though your agency has not agreed to copyright law. All right? There is what economists call an external benefit, because by his agreeing, in effect, he's agreeing to be bound by copyright law, indirectly through his firm. By his agreeing to that, he is giving me an incentive to write more. And my writing more is producing a benefit to other readers, including readers whose agencies did not agree to copyright law. So that means that the private market for law I have described will produce a less than optimal level of protection for intellectual property. I don't know what the optimal level is. It could be the optimal level is 0, in which case it doesn't matter. But just in terms of the pure economics of it, because all of the benefit of protection goes to me as the guy who's protected. Sorry, I'm wrong. All of the cost of protection goes to him as the guy who's got to pay me the fees. Some of the benefit goes to me, and some of it goes to all those people who aren't in this negotiation because they've got different enforcement agencies. Consequently, the part of the benefit will get left out of the calculation, and therefore you might fail to get copyright law even if benefits were larger than costs. It's a little technical, but at least to me it's interesting to see what are the imperfections of what seems to me to be the best system I can describe. Let me make a further point, though, which again should be of interest especially to economists, not only to economists. And that is that the market that I'm describing is really quite a weird market. Because at first glance you say it's a competitive market. Look, there are 300 million people out there, all of whom are in effect bargaining through their agents for legal rules. But it isn't really a competitive market. It's really 300 million monopolies. Because you see, what I want to buy from him, I thinking myself as one person in this market operating through middlemen, is his agreement to legal rules. He's the only person in the world who can sell his agreement to legal rules. I can't buy 2 agreements from you and use one of them for him. So in effect, what we have is a monopoly bargaining in which I am bargaining with everyone in the world on what rules I will agree to. He's bargaining with everyone in the world on what rules he will agree to. And of course, just as the real economy doesn't consist of individual producers and consumers dealing with each other, we have middlemen. So in this one, my agency is representing me and 50,000 other people in its part of the bargaining, and his similarly. So we are going to have, as I've argued, forces that are move us towards efficient rules, but if you try to think of it as an economic problem, it's a mistake to imagine that it's the wheat market. It isn't the wheat market. It's something much stranger. It's a market of a whole lot of monopolies engaging in bargaining. And as some of you may know, although economists don't like monopoly markets as much as competitive markets, with perfect bargaining, even monopoly markets give you efficient outcomes. That's one of the implications of what's called the Coase theorem. So that, again, for the economists out there, the argument I'm making really relies more on Coase than on Marshall, even though I'm getting what sounds like a Marshallian result of an efficient outcome. All right, I think that's basically what I wanted to say. I assume that some of you will want to talk about other issues associated with what I'm describing, but what I really wanted to focus on, partly because some of you are already familiar with the idea of anarcho-capitalism, is looking at anarcho-capitalism not as a more or less just system, but simply as a set of institutions in which it is the